the second, but he was going waking himself. I tell you, the mare had the hind leg fast in the fore. Clancy was dipping in the saddle. 'Twas a damned nice race, whatever." We gained the inner room at last, a cheerless apartment, adorned with sacred pictures, a sewing machine, and an array of supplementary tumblers and wine glasses; but at all events we had it so far to ourselves. At intervals during the next half hour, Mary Kate burst in with cups and plates, cast them on the table, and disappeared, but of food there was no sign. After a further period of starvation, and of listening to the noise in the shop, Flurry made a sortie, and after lengthy and unknown adventures reappeared, carrying a huge brown teapot, and driving before him Mary Kate with the remainder of the repast. The bread tasted of mice, the butter of turf smoke, the tea of brown paper; but we had got past the critical stage. I had entered upon my third round of bread and butter, when the door was flung open, and my valued acquaintance Slipper, slightly advanced in liquor, presented himself to our gaze. His bandy legs sprawled consequentially, his nose was redder than a coal of fire, his prominent eyes rolled crookedly upon us, and his left hand swept before him the attempt of Mary Kate to frustrate his entrance. "Good evening to my venerable friend, Mr. Flurry Knox," he began, in the voice of a town crier, "and to the Honourable Major Yates, and the English gentleman." This impressive opening immediately attracted an audience from the shop, and the doorway filled with grinning faces as Slipper advanced further into the room. "Why weren't ye at the races, Mr. Flurry?" he went on, his roving eye taking a grip of us all at the same time. "Sure, the Miss Bennets and all the ladies was asking where were ye?" "It'd take some time to tell them that," said Flurry, with his mouth full. "But what about the races, Slipper? Had ye good sport?" "Sport, is it? Diver so pleasant an afternoon ever you seen," replied Slipper. He leant against a side table, and all the glasses on it jingled. "Does your honour know old Driscoll?" he went on irrelevantly. "Sure you do. He was in your honour's stable. It's what we were all saying. It's a great pity your honour was not there for the liking you had to Driscoll." "That's true," said a voice at the door. "There wasn't one in the barony but was gathered in it, though and fro," continued Slipper, with a quelling glance at the interrupter. "And there was tents for selling porter and whisky as pliable as new milk, and boys going round the tents outside feeling for heads with the big ends of their blackthorns, and all kinds of recreations, and the Sons of Liberty's fiddler and drum band from Gibbon. Oh, faith, there was more of them running to look at the races than was playing in it, not to mention different occasions that the bandmaster was eating his lunch within in the whisky tent." "But what about Driscoll?" said Flurry. "Sure, it's about him I'm telling ye," replied Slipper, with the practised orator's watchful eye on his growing audience. "'Twas within in the same whisky tent myself was, with the bandmaster and a few of the lads, and we buying a ha'porth of crackers, when I saw my brave Driscoll landing in the tent, and a pair of dim long boots on him what hadn't a shoe nor a stocking to his foot when your honour had him picking grass out of the stones behind in your yard. Well, says I to myself, we'll knock some sport out of Driscoll. 'Come here to me, acushla,' says I to him. 'I suppose it's some way weak in the legs ye are,' says I, 'and the doctor put them on ye the way people wouldn't trample ye.' 'May the devil choke ye,' says he, pleasant enough, but I knew by the blush he had he was vexed. 'Then I suppose 'tis a lieutenant colonel ye are,' says I. 'Your mother must be proud of ye,' says I, 'and maybe you'll lend her a loan of them waders when she's rinsing your boneen in the river,' says I. 'There'll be work out of this,' says he, looking at me both sour and bitter. 'Well, indeed, I was thinking you were blue moulded for want of a bating,' says I. He was for fighting us then, but after we had him pacificated with about a quarter of a noggin of spirits, he told us he was going riding in a race. 'And what'll you ride?' says I. 'Old Beaucock's mare,' says he. "Nipe," says I, saying a great curse, "is it that little stageen from the mountains? Sure she's something about the one age with myself," says I. "Many's the time Jamesy Giggans and myself used to be driving her to Macroom with pigs and all sorts," says I. "And is it Leopardstown Walls you wanted to go now?" "Faith, there's walls and every variety of obstacle in it," says he. "It'll be the best of your play so," says I, "to leg it away home out of this." "And who'll ride her so?" says he. "Let the devil ride her," says I. Lee Kelway, who had been leaning back, seemingly half asleep, obeyed the hypnotism of Slipper's gaze, and opened his eyes. "That was now all the conversation that passed between himself and meself," resumed Slipper, "and there was no great delay after that till they said there was a race starting, and the dickens of one at all was going to ride. Only two, Driscoll and one Clancy. With that, then, I seen Mr. Kinnerhane, the petty sessions clerk, going round clearing the course, and I gathered a few of the neighbours, and we walked the fields hither and over till we seen the most of the obstacles. 'Stand aisy now by the plantation,' says I. 'If they get to come as far as this, believe me you'll see sport,' says I, 'and 'twill be a convenient spot to encourage the mare if she's anywhere weak in herself,' says I, cutting something about 5 foot of an ash sapling out of the plantation. 'That's your sort,' says old Beaucock, that was travelling the racecourse, pegging a bit of paper down with a thorn in front of every lip, the way Driscoll had know the handiest place to face her at it. Well, I hadn't barely trimmed the ash plant. Have you any jam, Mary Kate?" interrupted Flurry, whose meal had been in no way interfered with by either the story or the highly scented crowd who had come to listen to it. "We have no jam, only treacle, sir," replied the invisible Mary Kate. "I hadn't the switch barely trimmed," repeated Slipper firmly, "when I heard the people screeching, and I seen Driscoll and Clancy coming on, leaping all before them, and old Beaucock's mare bellowsing and powdering along, and bedad, whatever obstacle wouldn't throw her down, faith, she'd throw it down, and there's the traffic they had in it. I declare to me soul, says I, if they continue on this way, there's a great chance some one of them will win, says I. 'You lie,' says the bandmaster, being a trifle fulsome after his luncheon. 'I do not,' says I, 'in regard of seeing how supple them two boys is. You might observe,' says I, 'that if they have no convenient way to sit in the saddle, they'll ride the neck of the horse till such time as they gets an occasion to leave it,' says I. 'Ah, shut your mouth,' says the bandmaster. 'They're pucking out this way now, and may the devil admire me,' says his. 'But Clancy has the other bet out, and the devil such a leathering and belting of old Beaucock's mare as ever you seen what's in it,' says he. Well, when I seen them coming to me, and Driscoll about the length of the plantation behind Clancy, I let a couple of balls. 'Skelp her, you big brute,' says I. 'What's good's in ye that you aren't able to skelp her?' The yell and the histrionic flourish of his stick with which Slipper delivered this incident brought down the house. Lee Kelway was sufficiently moved to ask me in an undertone if "scalp" was a local term. "Well, Mr. Flurry and gentlemen," recommenced Slipper, "I declare to you, when old Beaucock's mare heard them roar, she stretched out her neck like a gander, and when she passed me out she gave a couple of grunts and looked at me as ugly as a Christian. 'Ha!' says I, giving her a couple of draws of the ash plant across the butt of the tail, the way I wouldn't blind her. 'I'll make ye grunt,' says I. 'I'll nourish ye.' I knew well she was very frightful of the ash plant since the winter Tommy Sullivan had her under a sidecar. But now, in place of having any obligations to me, you'd be surprised if you heard the blasphemous expressions of the young boy that was riding her. And whether it was over anxious he was, turning round the way I heard him cursing, or whether it was some slither or slide came to old Beaucock's mare, I don't know, but she was bet up agin the last obstacle but two. Before you could say snipes, she was standing on her two ears beyond in t'other field. I declare to you, on the virtue of me oath, she stood that way till she reconnoitred which side would Driscoll fall, and she turned about then and rolled on him as cosy as if he was meadow grass." Slipper stopped short. The people in the doorway groaned appreciatively. Mary K.